This is a moment of high danger for the rule of law in America. Their version of justice is just us. It's just serving Donald Trump. No president has ever done what this president has done. We are in the fight of our lives, and so we need all hands on deck.
Hello and welcome to the Jessica Yellin Show. We are live here on Substack every week, where we connect the dots on what's happening in the world in ways that empower, inform, and ideally keep you calm. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Congressman Jamie Raskin. He is a Maryland Democrat, the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, a man who has taught constitutional law for more than 20 years. So a wonderful guest at this moment, and a lovely man. Congressman, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, I'm psyched to be with you, Jessica. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with the news and development today. There was a shooting in Boulder, Colorado, anti-Semitic attack, where a man who claimed to be trying to free Palestine attacked a group of Jewish people marching for the hostages. Today, the Department of Homeland Security says that they have revoked the visas of his entire family and detained them. There are a lot of ways to handle these kinds of terror and hate crime investigations. Is this the right thing to do?
Well, gee, you're giving me news now that I was not aware of. I've been in meetings, Jessica, so I'm not really familiar with the details of it. Um, so, look, let me just state abstractly, where we are right now. There's, terrible violence that's been unleashed in our country and all over the world. There's terrible bigotry, anti-Semitism, racism. Um, and there's also this massive attack going on against immigrants at the same time. So now is the time that we have to hold steadfast to the rule of law. And the two most beautiful words in the English language are due process, because it's due process that establishes a barrier between the rights and freedoms of people and arbitrary power. And sometimes people say to me, well, does due process apply even to guilty people? Of course it does, because you don't know who's guilty and who's innocent until there's been due process. And so that applies throughout the government. So I don't know the specific cases of the perpetrator, culprits, family, and what's happening. And so I should withhold any commentary on that.
Okay, and I'll ask you a little bit about the immigration policy in a bit. On this attack, President Trump issued a statement afterwards in which he did not mention that the people who were the targets of the attack were Jewish. He did not use the word anti-Semitism or talk about anti-Semitism. And this is at the same time that he and his allies say that they are so determined to root out anti-Semitism in America that they are going after universities, including Harvard. Curious how you explain this contradiction, and is his fight against anti-Semitism really about protecting the Jewish community? Or do you think it's really more about silencing dissent, critical thinking, and institutions that challenge authoritarian power?
Definitely, it is the latter. It is not the former. If Donald Trump were serious about challenging and ferreting out anti-Semitism, he would begin with his own administration. Take Ed Martin, who was his U.S. attorney until he was forced to withdraw that nomination. Ed Martin, in addition to having covered up the fact that he'd appeared 150 different times on Russian propaganda state networks, also is just, knee deep into the anti-Semitic right-wing circles that have uh, come to saturate Republican politics now. Ed Martin is a guy who described a neo-Nazi, a Hitler imitator who draws a Hitler mustache on himself as not just a good friend, but a great man and a great leader. He repeatedly stood by him, despite the fact that this guy has said that Hitler's problem was that he did not finish the job. He said that babies who were born with a disability should be killed immediately. I mean, just sickening stuff. And Ed Martin continued to stand by him even after National Public Radio presented him with a catalog of all the things he was doing. And then later, when he got nominated to be U.S. attorney, he pretended not to know. But look, the violent assault on the Capitol on January 6th was infused with Christian white nationalist and anti-Semitic elements. There was one guy there who was wearing a T-shirt that said Camp Auschwitz staff on it, and it was just filled with racists and anti-Semites. So there's a spokesperson in the Department of Defense um, who is entangled in the same stuff. But you don't even have to look at the staff. You can look at Trump himself. I mean, he had over to Mar-a-Lago Nicholas Fuentes, who is a notorious neo-Nazi, Holocaust revisionist, anti-Semite, um, who tries to sanitize what Hitler did and to praise Hitler and always to uplift Hitler. He had Kanye West over. And if you go all the way back to the 2016 election, it's nothing new. The final TV ad that Donald Trump approved in that presidential election had pictures of Janet Yellen and Lloyd Blankfein and George Soros saying these globalists are essentially your enemies and they're trying to undermine your way of life. So we're talking about a political movement that is steeped in anti-Semitism, but they picked up anti-Semitism as a club and a weapon to attack Harvard University and its Jewish president, Alan Garber, um, simply, because of certain things that Harvard may have said they had done wrong in the past, or certain things that Trump doesn't like. They don't like free speech for anybody who speaks against Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party and Smotrich and Ben Gvir. So they will attack anybody who criticizes Netanyahu as anti-Semitic, while they harbor real anti-Semites and people who associate with neo-Nazis. And and we shouldn't pass over what happened in Charlottesville either, where Donald Trump was able to perceive very fine people on both sides of an anti-Semitic riot, where a young woman, Heather Heyer, was killed uh, in neo-Nazi violence. And these are the people who were marching around through Charlottesville, starting at a synagogue where they were chanting, "Jews will not replace us."
Let's flash forward for a moment. Can we imagine that it's after the election and how the Democrats win the House? You are the chair of the Judiciary Committee. Where do you begin your investigations? Do you think you have enough material already to move toward impeachment proceedings?
Well, we're keeping a very scrupulous catalog and inventory of all of the high crimes and misdemeanors that are being committed on an almost daily basis. The assaults on Congress's power under Article 1. Right now, there are more than 175 preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders that have been issued by federal courts across the land against this reign of lawlessness and this usurpation of congressional powers. Of course, there are all kinds of violations of due process that are taking place, both against immigrants, but also against federal workers. The whole point of the civil service is that you can't be fired for political reasons, but that's precisely what they've been doing to people, just sacking people en masse because they are not part of Donald Trump's little political cult. Um, and that's been tremendously damaging. I mean, I've got constituents who are, um, you know, uh, work for the FAA, air traffic controllers. I've got constituents who are NIH cancer researchers, FDA food and drug inspectors, Forest Service firefighters. All these people just randomly sacked by DOJ and by the Trump administration. It's got nothing to do with saving money, by the way. The first thing they did when they got in was they sacked 17 inspectors general, whose job it actually is to ferret out waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. And they got rid of them immediately, just like they've been dismantling all of the critical anti-corruption units in the Department of Justice. And of course, um, their version of justice is just us. It's just serving Donald Trump. It's doing whatever he wants you to do. And they've been very plain spoken and straightforward about that. That's their vision of the Department of Justice, which for the first time in its history has now been completely subordinated to the political agenda of Donald Trump. And you saw it when they first got in, and they sacked more than a dozen veteran criminal prosecutors, some of the best criminal prosecutors in America, simply because they had worked on the January 6th investigation, which was the largest episode of mass mob violence ever directed against the United States Capitol and the Congress and the vice president. And then, of course, Donald Trump issued his pardon of 1,600 rioters and insurrectionists and extremists who brutalized and wounded and disabled more than 140 of our police officers. So they don't back the blue, they back the coup. That's the critical thing for them. Um, and, so basically, we are documenting all of this. Um, and look, Donald Trump's already been impeached twice. Um, we came close, but not close enough to convicting him um, in um, in 2021. But Mitch McConnell, who I sat, 7 or 8 feet away from, and all of whose body language and facial expressions and everything he said to me during the breaks indicated that he was going to vote to convict, voted to acquit. And then he made a whole statement about how well, Donald Trump was ethically, morally, actually responsible for everything that happened, but the Senate did not actually have jurisdiction to try a former president, which cut not just against 2 centuries of precedent in terms of impeachment and trial of former officials, but it also cut against what the Senate had decided on the very first day of the trial, which was a rejection of precisely that motion. So they really engaged in the greatest case of jury nullification in American history.
But I heard you say we've been recording his high crimes. So do you think that there is enough already, or we
Oh,
don't know yet?
based on everything that's happened? Well, let's sure, just in the realm of emoluments itself, accepting a $400 million 747 jumbo jet Bribe Force One gift from the monarchical, autocratic, authoritarian government of Qatar um, is a direct, naked violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause unless Congress approves the gift. And he has refused to come to Congress and has rejected all of our entreaties to come to Congress. I sent him a letter telling him he must come to Congress in order to get that approved. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 says that the president and any other federal official cannot accept a present, an emolument, which means a payment, an office or title of any kind, whatever, from a king, prince, or foreign state without the consent of Congress. Abraham Lincoln received 2 elephant tusks that he loved from the king of Siam during the Civil War. And he came to Congress to ask, could he keep them? And Congress said, hey, we love you, Honest Abe, you're doing a great job in the Civil War, but no, turn those over to the Department of Interior. No president has ever done what this president has done in terms of just mopping up all of the loot from foreign states. And, we released a report, which you can get, the Oversight Democrats have a report on what happened in the first administration. And we just got a very fragmentary, superficial view, but certainly millions and millions of dollars from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the Chinese government, all of the autocrats and the plutocrats and the theocrats of the world paying tribute to him through the Trump Hotel. Well, now it's not millions, it's billions coming in through the new crypto scams and schemes that have proliferated in this administration. And they're not even pretending anymore that they're not in business. I mean, that's the whole name of the game.
Let me ask you about the crypto, because I know that you have called for an investigation into his crypto fundraiser that the president hosted. And I know I have to say, may have personally benefited both his businesses and possibly evaded campaign finance laws. I've heard you warn that you worry that foreign governments may be funneling money to him through anonymous crypto transactions. Seems quite evident that that might be the case. If it is happening, what kind of threat does this pose to national security and to election integrity? And really, this is the big question. Who has the authority now to stop this?
Well, all of these emoluments are riddled with threats to our national security, to our public safety, to our public integrity. That's why we've got the emoluments clauses in the Constitution to try to create a wall of separation between the presidency and the public office and private wealth and private money coming from foreign states. The framers were um, seriously afraid of foreign governments having their way with the United States by paying off presidents or other public officials. So it's just replete with potential for corruption. It's certain that the corruption is taking place. And if you read our report from about the last administration, we know what a huge difference it made in lots of different cases. I mean, just look at Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump at one point bragged about having saved the posterior of the homicidal crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, because he had ordered out for the assassination of a journalist with the Washington Post, Jamal Khashoggi. Um, and Trump helped him cover it up and was very clear about what he was doing. Well, of course, his son-in-law then comes back with more than $2 billion from the Saudi sovereign fund as a payoff for that. And when one of his cabinet members was on his way to Saudi Arabia, Trump reminded him to remind bin Salman that he had, quote, saved his rear end there. I mean, we're talking about murder. We're talking about assassination. And then we're talking about payoffs in return. So this is a gangster state. And we've got to be doing everything in our power to defend the rule of law and the Constitution against people who would trample everything we've got. So, yeah, these are high crimes against our Constitution and against the Bill of Rights and against the rule of law in America.
Given all that and the frustration of so many of the American people who see what you see and don't understand why the government isn't able to hold the president to account, do you think as a party the Democrats are doing enough, or is there something you wish either your colleagues or even people watching or the public would do that they're not?
Well, look, the good news is that we are winning in court every single day. And you can go down the major initiatives, including tariffs, which uh, the International Trade Court blew the whistle on because it's totally lawless. It's within the power of Congress to regulate commerce, both domestically and with foreign states. Congress imposes tariffs, not the President of the United States. He invoked IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which doesn't mention tariffs and has never been used for tariffs before. So they put him in his place. It's the same thing. Look at the attempt to strip birthright citizenship from the Constitution. That's the first sentence of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. That was struck down by 4 different judges, 2 appointed by Democrats, Obama and Biden, 2 appointed by Republicans, Bush and Reagan. And maybe the most blistering opinion came from the Reagan judge who said, I've been on the bench for 4 decades. I've never seen anything this unconstitutional. I've never seen an easier case than this because it collides directly with the language of the Constitution. But still, we don't know what's going to happen in the Supreme Court because,
Sure.
you've got Alito and Thomas on there who are just like drugged religious cult members sleeping on a basement floor listening to tapes of their dear leader at this point. But the other 7 justices have stood up in different contexts for due
But they
process.
defied them,
Well,
basically.
and this is, not completely. I mean, for example, in that 7-2 decision, they said, turn those vans and buses around that were headed for the
That's
border.
true.
They said, turn them around. It was a 1 a.m, and they
And they
did it.
did.
And that shows how serious those justices are taking the situation. But you're right. We're dealing with lawless actors here who will do anything they can to escape the force of the law. That's why Judge Boasberg, who's a Republican appointee, a Bush appointee originally to the bench, he was Justice Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale. That's why his district court opinion in the Brero Garcia case is so critical because he said, I will use as a federal judge the powers of this court of criminal and civil sanctions, contempt power to see to it that you will obey the orders of the court. And that's when you get, J.D. Vance and all the Trump people whining about they're trying to overturn an election and all that nonsense. When they were in court, every time they thought that Joe Biden was doing something unconstitutional or illegal, we all accept that you're bound by the Constitution unless you amend the Constitution. I could campaign for president on establishing my own church, an official governmental church. And let's say I win. Does that mean that the First Amendment no longer applies to me and I can establish a church as president? I don't think so. The Constitution applies to every president that there's ever been, regardless of what they've campaigned on. The Constitution doesn't change unless the people change it.
Let me ask you about, since we touch on deportations, what's going on with ICE right now. There's so much we could talk about, but specifically the fact that so many of these, we think they're ICE officers, are wearing masks and they are not showing papers sometimes when they're asked to show their papers or a warrant. Um, is this lawful? And if it's not, what entity should be acting to stop this?
Well, I want to know from the Trump administration, by what authority are their officers going out there and saying that they don't need to have a warrant in order to enter people's homes and offices? Now, this just happened to my colleague, Jerry Nadler from New York, where the agents entered his district office in Manhattan, um, and then demanded that they be shown around. They handcuffed and arrested a 26-year-old legislative aide who was absolutely frantic and hysterical, crying because that's not necessarily part of your job description as a young constituent service aide in the district office of a member of Congress. Obviously, it's meant to intimidate and terrify members of Congress and their staff. But another staffer who was in there, you can see this on the video if you check it out online. She's saying, "Well, where's your warrant?" And the guy says, "I don't need a warrant. I'm a federal officer." Well, that's the whole reason we need to see your warrant, because you're asserting that you're a federal officer. You're claiming to be a federal officer, but by what warrant do you come enter? That's what the Constitution says in the Fourth Amendment. You need a warrant based on probable cause, specifically identifying what it is you're searching or who you're looking for.
So I mean, this is happening to people all over the country. The videos are all over the place on social media. I hear from them myself. Like, who should be doing something about this? If Congress won't because Republicans are in charge, what's another mechanism?
Well, on this one, for example, Congressman Nadler and I just wrote a letter demanding a hearing here in the Judiciary Committee, and I'm the ranking member of Judiciary. If they don't do it, we're going to have our own hearing. But this is why the courts are so important and why we are acting with as much vigor and power as we've got to defend the independence of the courts, because the courts understand almost without exception whether they're the appointee of a Republican or a Democratic president, that this is a moment of high danger for the rule of law in America. Unfortunately, they helped to set the table for this with their outrageous, groundless decision in the presidential immunity case, which gave Donald Trump every reason to believe he was like a king and
Yeah.
that he could operate in such a way as to be selling pardons, right? I
That's
mean,
why.
the case of this Walchuk guy is unbelievable. The guy was a nursing home operator who ripped off his own employees by withholding money from their paychecks, but not putting in not holding it for their income taxes or for Medicare. He used it to buy himself a $2 million yacht. And he's
It's
buying
crazy.
all other kinds of stuff and traveling all over the world. Well, then he gets found out. He's prosecuted. He has every due process right, and he's convicted by a jury of his peers beyond a reasonable doubt. And a couple days after Trump's inauguration, asks for a pardon, um, and they're not hearing anything. And then his mother goes to a Trump event, $1 million a head Trump event. And what do you know? The full, complete, unconditional pardon is forthcoming. He's saved 18 months in jail, and he doesn't have to pay $4.5 million in restitution to his victims. So they made a $1 million investment to Trump, and he gets off the hook for $4.5 million. The former U.S. pardon attorney, whose name is Liz Oyer, who got sacked by them, of course, she has estimated that victims of crimes and the federal government have already lost $1 billion from the pardons that Trump has
Wow.
issued to these people who are engaged in pay to play with him, but they don't have to pay their victims anymore, and they don't have to pay fines to the government for what they've
It's
done.
wild. I
And the
have
Supreme Court is complicit in this because of that decision. And I think a lot of them are having justice's remorse about that decision because it's not based on any text in the Constitution, some textualists, and it's not based on anything that was in the original design of the Constitution, some originalists. They just, plucked it out of thin air. I mean, they pulled a rabbit out of a hat with that one.
I I have so much I could keep talking to you about. I know we're on a schedule.
I've
Yes.
got 10 minutes, I think so.
Okay, good. So I want to ask you about you've introduced a piece of legislation about tariffs, which is the Truth in Tariffs Act, which should make retailers show how much of the price of their good has gone up because of tariffs. Now, Amazon tried to do this, and then President Trump dinged them publicly and they pulled it back. So I'm sort of curious, are you surprised by how quickly corporate America has sort of folded in the face of Trump's threats? And isn't this the sort of thing that should happen without legislation?
Well, yeah, first of all, that's characteristic of an authoritarian society, a fascist society where the president bosses the businesses around. And good for them that they thought to do it in the first place, but unfortunately, they backed down. They shouldn't have backed down. To be clear, I think those tariffs are completely, totally unconstitutional for the reasons I mentioned before. It's not within the president's power to impose tariffs on domestic businesses, which have to pay them. But what I was saying is, long as they're going to be out there before they get struck down by the courts, then if it's going to cost you an extra $2,000 or $3,000 to buy a car, or an extra $500 or $800 to buy a computer, it should be reflected on the price tag of the computer or the car. When Trump was running around saying, oh, China's going to pay, everybody knew that was nonsense, except for the people who were confused by what Trump was telling them. And so this just makes it clear. If it's a $1,000 computer, but it costs an extra $400 because of the tariff, then say the computer costs $1,000 plus $400 for the Trump tariff, $1,400, because the businesses have to pay his tariff. And then the businesses pass the cost on to the consumer, which is why this is like a national sales tax. And in addition to it being totally lawless and unconstitutional and illegal, it's also terrible public policy what he's doing. And it's, one step in, one step out. It's on again, it's off again. It's just a yo-yo. It's just chaos. And the businesses can't do any kind of meaningful planning because there's no stability in the market.
I know there's a new report out today from the OECD that says global economy is going to contract as a result of this, including in the US. So I want to ask you to shift gears for a minute. You are fighting all these fights publicly. You've also personally fought health battles. You had a cancer diagnosis, and I don't need you to talk about it, but I am interested in this. Cancer is not something that discriminates red and blue.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, since you've been dealing with this, have you had any sort of human moments with people on the other side of the aisle connecting with you on your health and your humanity that give you hope about the possibility to build bridges in this moment? Or has your diagnosis given you sort of a wisdom that you could share with people about handling difficult times like the time we're living in?
Well, sure. I appreciate your asking. There are a number of Republicans who were good to me when I went through the lymphoma and the chemotherapy, which was pretty savage. And I made some friends out of it. Lauren Boebert from Colorado is my friend. Marjorie Taylor Greene actually tweeted some nice stuff, and I tweeted, some friendly stuff back, but it did not occasion any real transformation in our relationship. I think we're like ship sailing in the night. But others have been, good to me. And so there is a common humanity there that sometimes breaks through, and I like it. But, uh, you know, the cancer thing is incredible because they've been dismantling, as you know, so much of the health infrastructure of the country, and not just on vaccines and research into certain diseases and immunities and autism, so on, but just across the board. Each of us gets to bring a guest to go to the State of the Union, the joint session. And I brought a wonderful cancer researcher, a doctor from NIH, who's my constituent, Dr. Lauren McGee, who has devoted her entire career to solving childhood cancer. And she's shown me pictures of young people whose lives were saved by the research that they were doing out at NIH. As I'm pretty sure my life was saved by research that was done into lymphoma out at NIH. But anyway, she got sacked on February 14th, 2025 by Elon Musk and some of the teenage computer hacking night riders at DOJ who just decided, we're going to get rid of her because she was on probation. The reason she was on probation wasn't because she knocked over a liquor store. She was on probation because she'd been promoted to be the head of the entire unit. So anyway, I brought her that night. And we had to listen to Donald Trump say that one of his key priorities was to wipe out childhood cancer in America when he had basically wiped out their unit. Okay. Then we hear him say that Elon Musk, who's in the crowd, has saved us just untold amounts of money. For example, he saved us $8.5 million, Trump said, on NIH creating transgender mice.
I know, it's
And
insane.
I text my friend, I say, transgender mice, that doesn't sound very good. Maybe there's something to this whole Doge thing after all. Well, no, it's been debunked 2 weeks before that. They knew it was a lie. It was debunked. It was $8.5 million to create transgenic mice. They were injecting mice with DNA so they could do research on asthma and breast cancer and malignant narcissistic personality disorder and all the other diseases that they're searching there. And by the way, when we left that thing, I went to go outside. There's like this huge crash outside. Turns out Speaker Johnson's chief of staff has plowed into the back of a parked police cruiser. And,
I forgot that.
they pull him out of the car. He staggers out. They arrest him. They give him the breathalyzer. And of course, he's, way beyond the speed limit. But Speaker Johnson says, no, there will be no repercussions. He's a great, loyal guy. There was a reporter there who said to me, so what do you think about this? I said, well, it's very clear that there are way too many DUI hires in the new Republican Party, starting with Pete Hegseth himself, but not ending there.
Let me ask you, I know you probably got to go. Last question. One of the key ways to hold the president accountable and to document what's happening is through the free press. And I'm curious from where you sit, how you think the press is doing right now, if there are stories you'd like to see journalists cover more that are being ignored, or what's your assessment of how they're performing under this pressure?
Well, first of all, we know Donald Trump has said that the press are the enemies of the people. On the contrary, the press are the people's best friends. And without our best friend, we'd really be up the creek. So I salute everybody in the press who's doing their job today. They are obviously attacking the press. Trump is unleashing the FCC against media entities he doesn't like because he doesn't think they're fairly covering him. I think he sued, was it CBS that he sued for $20 billion because he didn't like the way that their interview with Kamala Harris was edited. I mean, it's farcical, but then he uses it as a shakedown, a private shakedown opportunity because he unleashes the FCC against them. And if they want to get a merger or an acquisition or a license through the FCC, they've got to go and make a deal with Donald Trump. So it's a shakedown operation like everything else that he's done. But they're censoring the press, like with the Associated Press, who got kicked out of different White House functions because they simply call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico. They won't use the new propaganda language that he's insisting on. So I think that we're in a completely different media ecosystem environment, and at this point, it's a good thing. I love MSNBC and CNN and New York Times, but that's not reaching lots and lots of Americans, especially a lot of young Americans. And so that's why, I think a lot of my Democratic colleagues have made the commitment to go on shows like yours where people are getting access and content in different ways. And we've got to be nimble and clever as we do that. So we're really reaching people with information. But I would just say, in terms of your last question about should they be doing something different, look, I think that there is such massive, spectacular, unprecedented corruption taking place right now, where the whole government has been turned into a money-making machine for Trump and his family and all of the assorted corrupt conglomerate enterprises that are like barnacles on their administration, that people have really got to be focused on telling these stories because it's extraordinary what's happening at the same time that they're trying to destroy the living standards and the great institutional programmatic achievements of democracy, like Medicare, like Medicaid, like Social Security. They are in this massive money making operation for themselves.
Is there anything you'd like people watching this to be able to do or know? Should they be calling every day? You
Well, yeah, I mean, those are kinds of the obvious things. Sometimes people say to me, well, what's the one thing I should do if there's something I could do? And I guess I would say join a group, whether it's one of the national groups like Indivisible or Move On or your union or whatever it is, or form your own group, because that group can then stay on top of everything that's going on nationally, internationally, and locally, and can send out an advisory every day to say, hey, everybody needs to stand with Ukraine today against Vladimir Putin and his filthy imperialist invasion of their country. Everybody needs to go to the Supreme Court today. Everybody needs to try to stand up for the transgender kids who are under attack ruthlessly, constantly by the right wing. Whatever it might be, solidarity is the watchword. And that's what's going to get us through this thing. We are going to get through it. We are going to be stronger than ever we were, but we are in the fight of our lives. And so we need all hands on deck.
Congressman, thank you so much for your passion, for your clarity, for your time today, and very glad you're in good health.
Thank you, Jessica. Keep up your awesome, great work, okay?
Thanks. Hope to see you soon.